especially with the Fair Elections Program, that each certified candidate will have an audit at the end of the process, whether it is that they do not proceed from the primary to the general election, that the campaign operations will be audited in order to trace the use of public funds. So the audit process is a very critical component of what we do. And in terms of the realignment of the Fair Elections Program with the traditional campaign finance program, one of the reasons for that realignment was the fact that the participation in the traditional program has shifted so in terms of the candidates who register for our programs. And so the majority of the candidates now are registering in the Fair Elections Program, and that's a much more involved process in terms of the verification of contributions, in terms of determining whether candidates meet the threshold requirements. And then again, because public funds are involved, we are compelled to conduct audits of each of the campaign operations of the candidates who are certified. So our work shifted though, and our resources were underutilized in the traditional campaign finance program, because in that program, basically we do periodic random audits, and we also do full field audits, but we really limited the full field audits to the campaign operations of candidates who were elected to office. So the balance of the work really shifted. And then one other thing I would point out too is that we have so many candidates who file the $500 waiver, and then we have the write-in candidates. So we have a large portion of the candidates who register in the traditional program are not filing reports of receipts and expenditures on the filing dates. So from that standpoint, there was such a shift in work that we felt compelled to realign the divisions so that if the auditors are, or the audit operations are in one cohesive audit division, then all of our auditors, our line auditors, will be able to not only to do audits that are conducted in the traditional program, but also in the Fair Elections Program as well.
All right, and therefore we primarily are concerned with the fair elections audits process, and that's sort of spelled out in the 16 guidance pieces that you get at the beginning. I'm trying to remember what I went through, and I believe I was told that if I didn't go through the training, then there was no dice. I could not have a fair elections account. And should that be in law? It sounds like it's more regulations.
Well, right now it's
Would it be more teeth, I'm saying?
I don't know if it'll be more teeth if it was in law, because right now is our procedures.
Right,
And,
regulations,
yeah.
yes.
So, our procedure is that we try to what I call audit as we go now. When we first got into the program and the first election, we struggled with the audits because we weren't asking for documentation on the front end of things. Now that we're asking for documentation such as bank statements, merchant statements, and things of that nature before we even make a payout for that particular report, we're getting more documents and we can audit as we go. So we try to make sure we treat every report as an audit. That way that by the end of the election cycle, we're at the point where we can do a full field audit a lot quicker and make people more accountable. Now,
You're making the case for law.
Yeah,
law,
will it?
Bill.
Yeah,
bill,
will it give it more teeth? I
act,
would just
act.
have to defer to the general counsel on that.
No, actually, I believe we can handle the realignment internally instead of waiting for legislation. The director has that authority to, and we've already commenced the process as well. So, I mean, perhaps Laura might give it more teeth, but I think we will have sufficient teeth if the director realigns those and merges those two divisions.
You know, you raise a fair point. I sometimes forget who we are, little old DC, in this big fishbowl. And recently, we're constantly reminded that we are but a federal jurisdiction.
Mhm.
Thank you for that reminder.
Mhm.
Sometimes I think we are somebody, okay?
Mhm.
And therefore, you know, we can move ahead and
Mhm.
do what most communities would do, but thank you for that.
I mean, by statute, the director has the ability to conduct audits. And then, of course, in our regulations, we require the audit in the FEP program of each campaign operation of a candidate who is certified in the program.
Right.
So we do provide for it by regulation under the general umbrella of the audit authority.
But let's say we're in a situation, I was thinking, if we're in a situation where a candidate decides, I'm not going to comply,
Mm-hmm.
I know we can take them to court.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have a better leg to stand on if we have a law that they have violated than if they violate a regulation? That's what I was concerned with. Because regulations sometimes change from administration to administration.
Well, and you're right, you're absolutely right. If the statute was amended, of course, we would stand behind the authority and the force of a statute. And administrations do change. They could change the requirement that each FEP certified campaign operation be audited. So,
Okay. All right. Well, bring on the paperwork that we need to move forward on. I'm very happy for us to do that. You know, this is my last year here, so I want to do everything that I can to really make a difference, to make things better. Um, it's interesting. I've found that now I'm looking for what is it that we need to improve. You find more things than when you're just, oh, let me just get through this and to the next,
yes,
so-called So thank you very much.
you're welcome.
All right. And so happy to see you, Miss Montgomery, out
Thank
with
you.
us. We're so happy to have you.
I'm glad to be here.
Institution into yourself, most definitely. You know a lot about all of this and what have you. The schedule of fines, are we fining enough that those who violate really try to do better, that it's really discouraging people from not adhering to the regs?
I believe our fines are comparable to other jurisdictions. So the fines, I believe, are sufficient at this stage. However, collection of the fine has been the problem for us.
All right. Okay. And if you had your own board, it would make sense. I heard that too. You've got work for a board, in other words. That's how I'll say it.
Well, and I do believe under the statute which provides for the new campaign finance board, the general counsel would have the authority to seek enforcement in the Superior Court, whereas now we go through the Board of Elections.
Yes,
Yeah.
I hear you. And I see fair elections being the activity of the land. As you said, I mean, in just 2 years, it's just mushroomed. So I think we ought to show respect for the process. So that's where I was coming from. So, thank you. Well, thank you very much for you and the team spending time with us today. We really appreciate it. And we hope to see you at budget time with some solutions to what is likely to be a dilemma if we're
Okay.
not careful. So thank you very, very much.
All right, and thank you.
Thank you.
My
Pleasure seeing
pleasure.
you.
We're going to take a 5-minute break. I'll say we'll come back at 3:15. That clear? 3:15? Thank you.
Thank you.
No, that wasn't bad at all. Thank you.
delay. I thought I was not late. Oh, fantastic. You're up here. It's hot. It's hot in here.
Overcorrected.
Overcorrected. I know. I mean, yeah. That was a long, Board of Elections is a very long hearing.
For documented and racial equity. People commending, what you do in training staff within government. How can you bring it to a meeting? Even where the feds are on me. Whatever we do is as it been working. These helps people feel.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of like nice. So I applaud you again this year. People want big. There are some. We are reconvened in our oversight hearing, And our final office of examination is the Office of City Administrator. Um, Basically, the city administrator is focused on drafting budget and performance government operations activities that he primarily manages through meetings and directives with the assistant city administrators and the deputy mayors. The city administrator is also the conduit for reports, performance measures, and implementation of the mayor's orders. And the city administrator, most importantly, is the point in our government by which we begin the process of establishing policy and the implementation of policy throughout the government. And so this office is tantamount to the establishment of our government. We always have the elected officials, but the city administrator and that team of individuals within that office are the so-called top of the pyramid of what we get done through our government processes. It includes the Budget and Performance Management Office, the district-wide agency that oversees and supports, also known as Government Ops, the Office of Racial Equity, Communications, the Lab, and Safe Urban Infrastructure, the SUI. Sounds like a spy group. The city administrator provides oversight and support. Moreover, the city administrator manages the performance of activities and organizes multi-agency accountability sessions with the mayor and prepares the annual, of course, operating and capital budgets, and is the mayor's top policy advisor. And so sometimes we say that our city administrator is a guru of sorts. Today, we hope to have the opportunity to discuss many different aspects of government with the city administrator. And with that, we will hear from Kevin Donahue and his team, and I will swear him and his team in. I think Jenny Reed, our budget guru, is at the table with him. So if you raise your right hand,
Would you like the others who might answer questions also stand up?
yes, thank
Okay,
you.
if I go to Rebecca and Ann.
You want to, did I hear you want to stand while you answer questions?
No, no, no. If I have a couple of other folks who I may bring to the table.
Joke, joke, okay. All right, please, yes, thank you. Do you swear and affirm that your testimony and any statements that you make before us today to be truthful and complete?
Joe?
Thank you. Thank you very much, and you can begin when you're ready.
Okay. Good morning, Chairperson Bonds. I'm Kevin Donahue, and I have the honor of serving as the City Administrator. And I'm here today to discuss the performance of the Office of the City Administrator for fiscal years 2025 and 2026. I'm joined at the table by Jenny Reed, the Deputy City Administrator and Director of the Office of Budget and Performance Management. I'm joined in the room by Dr. Amber Hewitt and Rebecca Mina, who would be here to answer questions that go in depth about the Office of Racial Equity and the GovOps team should they arise. A little bit about the Office of the City Administrator. It serves as the central hub of government services and operation. We prepare and manage the district's budget, which means we monitor agency budgets throughout the year, try to predict costs the district will see in coming years, and evaluate whether programs are effectively using their budgeted funds. We also work closely with the agencies to set operational goals and implement the legislative actions and policy decisions of the mayor and the council. My office also monitors federal changes affecting the district to address the anticipated impacts and represent the interests of district residents. We also act as the hub of coordination for several critical priorities, including reviewing programs to identify cost savings and increasing effectiveness. As the mayor and I have discussed at length with the council, the upcoming fiscal year 27 budget will pose significant challenges and will require a reevaluation of our priorities across the entire government. Now I'll discuss each of the component offices within the OCA. The Office of Budget and Performance Management, led by Jenny Reed, is comprised of 4 teams that I will describe. The budget team formulates the budget, tracks performance through regular performance meetings with each agency's key metrics and strategic initiatives, and monitors budget execution throughout the year. Every year, the budget team develops and transmits to the council a balanced budget and financial plan, as well as a balanced capital improvement plan. The performance team works with agencies and deputy mayors to develop specific initiatives that achieve progress towards meeting the mayor's goals and agency objectives. The team leads meetings to address important issues facing the district using data-driven, collaborative approaches. In FY25, this team held 21 such meetings that we call CAPSTAT meetings, resulting in actionable recommendations to improve services and programs. The lab at DC, which is the 3rd team, now 10 years old, works to ensure the district's policy decisions are informed by the best evidence from research and resident input. In FY25, we expanded this work by launching the lab at DDOT, a team of 4 DDOT employees who brought these skills and capacity to DDOT to improve safety and accessibility. The lab works closely with agency-based fellows, agency directors to perform a mutual support network on sharing resources and unsticking technical problems. In its first year at DDOT, these lab fellows substantially worked on 6 research and design projects, including evaluating traffic fine reductions to test whether reducing fines improve collections and improve compliance. The results are expected this summer. The 4th team is what we call the good government team. That is the newest team in the OCA that is really meant to focus on cost control measures and trying to bend cost curves. Very often, some of the hardest work and issues of budget formulation require extensive time and research that overlap with the time needed to develop the budget. So we have a separate team that really focuses on some of these long-term cost control efforts. The Office of Racial Equity's objectives are to make government policies and processes more inclusive and to eliminate racial disparities in opportunities and access to resources within the district. ORE, now 5 years old, provides leadership and technical assistance, promotes strategic alignment and coordination across agencies. In FY25, for example, ORE trained more than 1,100 agency managers and supervisors in these skills. I want to highlight some of ORE's racial equity cohort program work. This is an evidence-based year-long curriculum designed to help agencies develop and deepen their racial equity practices. It includes activities to increase agency capacity to review policies, practices through a racial equity lens, and to support the development of a roadmap for integrating these principles throughout their work. As of February, ORE has led 4 separate racial equity cohorts, serving a total of 29 district agencies. We're also building on the successful launch of the district's racial equity dashboard in FY25 by expanding and updating the indicators reported. This comprehensive online platform currently provides data on 32 indicators across 7 dimensions of life, such as health and housing. And ORE and OCTO are currently working to enhance the indicators that exist and incorporate 10 additional metrics. Now onto the GovOps team, or the Government Operations team, led by Assistant City Administrator Chris Rodriguez, which we refer to as GovOps, as you mentioned in your opening. This is a group that oversees and empowers cluster agencies to focus on effective delivery of their own mission. This includes agencies such as DGS, DCHR, OCP, OCTO, ORM, and OLRCB. Think of these as agencies whose mission focuses on the internal workings of government. It also includes ODR, DMV, and DFHV as well. The GovOps team works on streamlining district procurement and hiring processes and identifies savings across these district agencies, including at government facilities. It is also leading an effort at using artificial intelligence in the workplace. Finally, the infrastructure cluster, or safe or sustainable urban infrastructure, we've shortened to just called the infrastructure cluster, focuses on clean air and water and safety and accessibility. In advancing these objectives by coordinating interagency activities and improving service delivery through continuous process evaluation. This team includes oversight of agencies that are very externally focused and essential in municipal government, including DPW, DDOT, and DOEE. All 3 agencies have been pivotal in orchestrating our Clean Corridors projects, as well as strategically working with the federal government, especially the National Park Service, on beautification projects throughout the city. I'll also highlight that the infrastructure cluster is working with GovOps on energy solutions and savings. Over the past 11-year Mayor Bowser's administration, we have had opportunities to gain hard-earned knowledge about coordinating government, including lessons learned with it while addressing immediate emergencies and strategies for making progress toward longer-term goals in an environment where there are always urgent tasks before us. We are relying on this experience as we make difficult budget decisions and implement additional good government solutions. Mayor Bowser has charged us to leave district government better than we found it and pass the baton so we can continue making progress for our residents. Thank you for the opportunity to share on my team's work. I want to especially thank everyone who contributed to the binder in front of me that I've used to prepare, especially the work of Chloe Cohen from my team, who put in particular efforts to make sure everything is well organized and thorough. Now I'm prepared to take your questions.
Thank you very, very much for that overview. I do want to just ask a little bit about your reference to the performance team working with agencies and deputy mayors to develop specific initiatives for progress. When you talk about the CAP stat meetings and you speak about the lab in particular and the work that they have been doing, initially I thought we were just going to talk about the so-called revenue enhancements, tickets and things like that, that the lab group may have been studying, but you went on to tell us that they do other types of projects. And if you could give us some indication of what these advanced 6 research and design projects might be. Because I'm wondering if any one of those is looking at WMATA, and particularly I'm hearing more and more that WMATA needs more money, and they're looking to the District of Columbia for more money. And I thought we already did a lion's share of the money that's needed on a regular basis. And just thought we'd talk a little bit about that.
Thank you. So they can sometimes appear to be overlapping, but they each have distinct missions. And I'll answer your question specifically both about the work of those teams and also talking about WMATA in particular. So think of this as the budget team formulates the budget, which is this very intense period over the course of 6 or 7 months. As we do that, we identify areas for efficiency that we incorporate into a budget, but we also recognize sometimes there's more to find there that may take 6 or 8 months to really uncover. So there'll be projects as we do budget formulation that spin off into work of what we call the good government team. And that is a team that looks at cost control and cost drivers that really take months to uncover. So that's sort of the nexus of that team to the budget. The performance team, which in an earlier life, I led the performance team in the OCA many years ago. This is a team that brings together common data about challenging problems that involve multiple agencies. So it's that what I call an eternal mission of the OCA is cross-agency coordination. And think of it as very well organized research meetings involving individuals from each agency that touches an issue, no matter where they sit on the org chart, and then having rigorous data provided to everyone so we can have a common factual foundation to have a discussion. Then each meeting ends with action items that are assigned to individuals and agencies. Then we come back to topics again and again. The lab at DC now, what they will do is say we're having a meeting on issues of fire prevention or 911. They can help identify a particular research challenge where we don't know the answer to a question, and we have to identify and do a study or a project to understand that. And they will sort of think of if the Good Government Club spins off long-term cost control issues, they will spin off research questions that have really practical policy and operational impacts, such as how do we best recruit safety techs, to speak of one about DDOT. What is the effect of changing fine levels for our ATE cameras in compliance and paying those fines? What's the effect of lower transit costs and rates to individuals and of our residents? Does it affect their employment? Does it affect their ability to access food in life? So it looks at sort of these questions that apply fairly quick research. Probably the most notable project they've done over the 10 years, in my eyes, has been looking at what we do with individuals who call 911 that have chronic medical needs and not emergency medical needs. Now, on the Metro question, which is a very important question that I think will be both for the executive and the council, is we did in fact increase their annual operating subsidy in last year's budget substantially. Metro has come to the region as part of a DMV's Moves effort organized by COG to request additional money in about 2 years' time on the capital side. And what the case that they've made is that the state of good repair that they have, for which they've had an increase in revenue from 2018, the money from 2018's regional really sales tax increase, that money's about to run out, it's going to run out in about 2 years. And so as a result of that, there is a cliff of how much Metro will have money available to reinvest on their capital investments. And they've come to the region to ask for, as present, about $460 million annually from across the region. That translates to DC about $170 million annually to increase their capital spending. They would then use this funding to take out a bond, so they'd issue their own debt against it and be able to continue working on capital work. That's one of the questions we are currently wrestling with as we do the budget. And I know that'll be a question when the budget comes to the council that you will wrestle with both this year, and if not this year, certainly next year as we approach their capital revenue cliff date, I think is 2029. So it's in a couple of years.
Thank you very much for that and for combining, the good government piece with the research. That's very helpful. It gives us, I think, a very clear understanding of how your office operates and what's the breadth of your work and your work style. We always think of the city administrator's office as the budget office. And so I wanted to sort of, pull that apart so that we can see that, yes, we have a budget process, but we also have the management of the agencies. And we have that whole policy development piece, which is a natural for the city administrator within the EOM. So I just wanted to pull that out, so thank you. Thinking long-term, as we plot and plan our government into the next months and years, what should residents and businesses expect as it relates to bike lanes and the size of traffic lanes? I know we've had some very generous discussions in the community about wanting to have the hospitality on the sidewalk. I'm not speaking of that. I'm really speaking of how does one get from the sidewalk, the curb, to waiting transportation, and how do they navigate a bike lane or several bike lanes? How do they especially navigate it if there is a concrete barrier between the bike lane and the roadway? And I get that question a lot from some seniors in the community. They just want to have a sense of, are we going to have little openings so that the wheelchair can move? Because all wheelchairs don't go to the curb and then get to a vehicle.
It's a great question. So my first job in DC government was at DDOT back in 2002. I think the city, during my first couple of years, may have done its first bike lane. At that point, as a painted bike lane. There was no concrete barriers or flex posts that was separating it. Over the years, there was a preference around the country for moving from that to flex posts or concrete barriers to protect and separate bikers from the regular roadway. And then DDOT for many years had adopted a metric of, I think it was about 10 miles of additional bike lanes each year. And when we were at a point in our development where the city didn't have many bike lanes, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that was pretty easy to get to without creating a lot of the inherent conflict between different users of that public space. What has happened, though, over time is that we are one of the nation's leaders in bike lanes. The low-hanging fruit is gone, and DDOT has pivoted from an annual number, I think wisely, to starting to look at, well, where is it smart to put a bike lane, and where are you going to minimize the negative ramifications of bike lanes on other people who live there? One thing the lab is doing is they're actually doing a volume count of how many bikers use it. That's something that has been anecdotal or has been done in short snippets. So looking at how many people use bike lanes. When a bike lane's develop, how many more bikers do you really get? And there's a lot of hearsay and anecdote that people will give you, but we want to study how many people actually use the bike lanes before and after they're installed. And for the question at the heart of it, which is how do you balance the needs of different users of public space? One element is, I'd say two elements. One is to be very careful, particularly if you're DDOT, to make sure you're listening to all the voices that are impacted by our decisions. Not all voices come to meetings in equal measure. Some individuals, like folks that are mobility challenged, may have a more difficult time being able to come to meetings when you're airing concerns or questions about a proposal. So making sure everyone is together and also being open, honest, and clear-eyed about the different trade-offs that you're confronting. So, and there can be a tendency, and since you're talking long-term, among everyone, to frame things in a way that present options as if there's no trade-offs, as if no one is going to be negatively affected by something. Doesn't mean the action is the wrong one to take, but it's really important to be honest and open about who this is going to help and who's going to be frustrated and challenged by a particular decision. But I'll just close the question by saying I think the most important change that DDOT's made recently is to move away from just an annual numerical metric of that put pressure for a number of miles every year and are changing to what makes sense given all the uses of our infrastructure. So where we really have a lot of demand for a bike lane versus we got to hit our 10 miles every year. So we're going to put one where it doesn't make any sense. And if you're a biker, and I do bike in the city sometimes, bikers get frustrated. A bike lane will appear and then magically disappear without warning or being connected to a network. Maybe that was an example of something where there's pressure to hit a numerical mileage number, and we have to move away from that and identify where will we have a big impact where we know there's going to be a clear, public use case for putting one there.
I really appreciate that response. And I guess I would really ask Dr. Hewitt if she has run across that kind of question in community. We heard about some of the areas of concern, but just wondered, as we talk about racial equity, from some of the public witnesses, we've heard, oh, you don't care about our community. You do these kinds of things. And I'm like, what are these kinds of things? And so I would much rather have a sense, if you've had incidents where people come to meetings and talk about where bike lanes are located, or we need more bike lanes, just curious about that.
Sure. Well, first, good afternoon, Chairperson Bonds, Jean Marie. Thanks for inviting me to the table and answering the question. I would defer to what the city administrator said around one of the most pressing issues when it comes to policy design, no matter what the issue is, bike lanes or otherwise, making sure that we're listening to the voices of residents. In our community meetings, bike lanes have come up around making sure that we're listening to residents, but also making sure we're meeting residents where they are. So the needs of bike lanes and the perspectives may differ based on ward, also how bikes are used. Is it for recreation or if it's commuting to work? I would say that's something that has come up, that distinction and how that may vary by ward within the district.
I really appreciate that answer because I have been in audiences where across the city where there have been issues with bike lanes. Then there have been issues where we want bike lanes. And it is hard. And I think it is one of those issues that we will be discussing for years to come. That's what I predict because, you know, I think what the lab will be doing, at least inventorying whether or not and what are the real numbers of cyclists is a very good approach. Because I can tell you from years ago, I would have said, we need bike lanes on 15th Street. I've seen the result of the bike lanes that we have. On 6th Street, I've only seen one cyclist ever, okay. So you get that back and forth and inevitably it ends up being an issue that surfaces when you're talking about community. What does community want? What should we be spending our money on? And so I just thought I was very curious, yes, about that.
If I could just maybe just quickly add, in other places, I say some of these other countries, there's much more of a willingness to try something out for a few months without feeling like you're politically wedded to it. Like you try it out and you see what happens. DDOT does, recently they've started to remove bike lanes where they've installed a bike lane, did not generate the interest or activity on the bike lane that they expected, and they removed it and maybe replaced it with just sort of a painted lane, not a fixed lane. So the principle behind what the lab does generally is allows agencies to experiment with something without becoming wedded to it, and then having a data-oriented look at like, well, what effect is it having before you commit long-term to a particular strategy.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I wish we in DC could embrace that process as opposed to to me, we have been famous for implementing a pilot and then the pilot is forever. And even if we don't use the pilot, you know, it's still forever. And yes. So how can we stop this where we implement a pilot and then we keep it forever? What can we do, Mr. City Administrator?
Well, one is to commit to an end date for their pilot. That's public. It's like, we're going to do this for a year, do it for 3 months, do it for 2 years, or longer if that's part of the project. And second, have the results be public. And one element that is a practice of the lab that I think should be shared is before we even enter into an evaluation, we will publish publicly what measurements we're going to use for success and how we collect that information. So that way the public and the council will know, and I will know, that we're not going to, at the end, look at data and just select the 1 or 2 elements that make it look good. We're like really open before day one about how we're going to really evaluate this at the end. And then having an open discussion, and it's often in the budget process. It's not always about the budget, but often the budget process about whether something has really worked. Sometimes that at moments of contraction fiscally. So it's, you know, you're more likely incentivized to be able to take hard looks at pilots when you know you have less money. I think in the past two budgets, the mayor has chosen to eliminate certain programs. This budget, we're looking very closely at what impact programs are having. So I just think, you know, creating a endpoint, being open on the front end about how we're going to evaluate what success looks like, and having that discussion out in the open at the end of it.
And so I would assume that process you're describing would be one where the legislators, the ones that appropriate the dollars, which I am one, would be, we also have to be held accountable. And that is, we have to look at the data. We have to certainly review the outcomes of the pilot before we think, oh, I love it myself, so therefore I'm putting more money into it.
If I could
So-
just add, Councilmember, I think it's Washington State as well. Their legislature has developed a program to do that for laws that they passed. So looking back at them 5 years later to say, are they working as we intended? Are there tweaks we should make? So I think that idea of looking back across programs, services, taxes, expenditures, legislation is a good one for all of us to adopt to see what changes might need to be made.
Thank you very much, and you softened the edges, so thank you for your comments. Thank you. Mr. City Administrator, I think you, aside from your responsibility to ensure that the mayor's orders are implemented in 2025, you issued some 9 administrative orders. What were they about? Can you share with us?
I will go off memory, ask my deputy city administrator to sort of add to her memory. So there are two kinds of orders in government that are at least cross-agency. One is a mayor's order that's formal, and the other is what's called city administrator orders. And the difference is when you have a mayor's order, that is the most significant. For those who report to mayor, it is the effect of its force of law in the sense that you must do it, and is to try to make sure we have strict alignment around something that often we didn't anticipate. The CA's order is something that is meant to formally capture a process that's going to affect a lot of people that maybe we have to impose quickly. So, for example, when the Congress put a spending cap on what the city could spend from its last year's budget, we had to suddenly have people get approvals for hirings and contracts that would go through the GovOps team to the budget director, sometimes to me. And we needed to actually put down in writing, so nothing was left to the imagination, what that process should look like. That's a CA's order. A CA's order, it's a little bit easier to turn them on or off. There may be more CA's orders than mayor's orders.
All right, well, I appreciate that, and you're taking us.
Oh, I'm
Oh,
sorry,
go right
Councilmember.
ahead.
I
No,
think
go
there
right
was
ahead.
also a city administrator's order issued around fleet. We've been doing a lot of work on our fleet management across the government, which is really led by DPW, and they've brought on a new, I guess you can't call him new anymore because he's been here for over a year, person to really manage that process. And what we've done are a couple different things. One, we've limited the types of vehicles that people can buy to about 5 different types. And I'm just speaking of like the sedans, not the specialty heavy equipment. What we found is that everyone was buying all sorts of cars, and then you had DPW trying to do the maintenance on them. And when you have all of these different types of vehicles, it's more difficult to keep supplies in stock, to keep people trained on how to, you know, be able to repair those vehicles. So we limited the number of options that people have so we can save on maintenance costs in the long run. We also did a look at the utilization of the vehicle. So we have our car system, which we work on with CFO, that tells us when should a car be replaced after it reaches a certain age. But we also found that many cars just didn't have any mileage on them, which meant that they really weren't being utilized. So we worked with agencies to be able to identify underutilized vehicles, and we repurposed, I think it was about 60 of them, to agencies that needed vehicles. And that is a continuous process that we're working on year-round.
Thank you for that. I had some incident with an agency that had a new car. It was 3 years old and it still had 23 miles on it. But that was years ago. We straightened that situation out. But I know what you mean. It's amazing, you know. And I think they had a fleet of, I want to say 23 vehicles, but yes, it can happen. You know, it can happen. So thank you for being diligent on that. I know we're at a point where we have to save every penny that we can and make sure, you know, we account for it and the good uses of it. So thank you for that. Today, I'm just sort of moving around throughout our government, trying to help all of us understand the breadth of our government and what it does and how it gets things done for the community. I wanted to ask a little bit about how frequently, Mr. Donahue, do you meet with the mayor? And how often do you typically meet with the deputy mayors? Is there some regularity to the process?
There is it changes from month to month given the issues. So I think I'll call it as a default standard of one standing meeting with the mayor each week to be able to go over issues that deserve her attention. Multiple meetings each week that involve important specific topics such as public safety, or topics that may be hot for a month or so, like the Potomac Interceptor breakage. With the chancellor around schools, it's the eternal topics as the public safety. I will interact with her nearly every day over phone, over text, or in meetings. The mayor and I will also, or I'll attend a meeting the mayor has to say with certain deputy mayors, such as the deputy mayor for economic development. That is on a regular occurrence to make sure the issues in that cluster receive her attention. With the deputy mayors, I will both meet individually with each deputy mayor on either a weekly or monthly basis, depending on how quickly issues change in their cluster, as well as convening all of us together at least every 2 weeks, if not more often. So that's the cadence, but things, as the world around us changes, the frequency and topics will change, either shifting to, if we're about to open schools in August, then there'll be more concentrated time for school opening. If we know we have a large event coming up like 4th of July, there'll be concentrated meetings around that. But there is a cadence, and I would say among the most important things for any mayor is how she gets, or whoever's the mayor, how they get information and the information flow up to the mayor, particularly in a city like DC, where we are a city, a county, a state. We have jurisdiction of the school district. There's such a incredibly wide breadth of information that could potentially come to her, and having a mechanism where the right information gets to her in the right depth, that it makes sure the mayor is the one who makes all the decisions that the people expect a mayor to make, but at the same time not overwhelming with the delusions of information and data that makes it difficult to sift through and sort out what's important and what's not important. And that is, I can't overstate how important that element of the Office of the City Administrator is, in the sense between budget, performance, the lab, the deputy mayor's offices who carry out a similar functions, but just for their cluster, being able to be positioned to advise the mayor on issues of operations, policy, strategy, personnel, external communications is a vital part of what these offices do.
So thinking about today, this point where we are in our history, what are the issues that we're dealing with this week, as an example?
It's a really good question. It is our peak budget season right now. Your peak budget season will be in April and May. Our peak budget season is now. So that probably consumes from me, if you had a pie chart of my time, probably 80% of my time. We're trying to be internally balanced in about the next week. So we can begin the process with the CFO of becoming formally balanced with pencils down. So that's very consuming at this part of the year. What that means is that there's 90% of the budget transactions we've already decided upon, but the 10% that we've not yet is some of the most important 10%. So we're working on that. I have an important oversight hearing right now. So that is part of the pie chart of my time to make sure I'm prepared for that. There is a surprising amount of defense that you play when you're in these roles. I think people come into the roles envisioning offense. But the reality of the work is that a lot of times you try to play really good defense, meaning things happen in the world that you didn't ask for or didn't want, but you have to respond to, and respond to well, like the people want you to. So whenever often the mayor would ask me how I think I'm doing, what I can do better, I always say more offense, less defense. Offense are the things that motivate you when you wake up in the morning to try to make the city better. But defense is the reality of stuff coming up throughout our day. So that little dealing with things that are unexpected every week probably accounts for 20% of the week on average. Sometimes it's 100% of the week. Sometimes it's maybe 5%. But there's always a sizable chunk that is how do we respond to the things that happen to us in life that we did not ask for, but we have to respond to and do so well. And I often think that the things that people remember in the public the longest are actually how people responded to the very hard things in life that they were confronted with. Probably even more so than the projects that got done successfully that represent the proactive work that we all get up to do each day.
And so thinking about the unexpected, that certainly has presented itself in the last few weeks, thinking about the sewage break, that would be unexpected. How do you feel? Have we turned the corner on that issue with the public and the understanding of what it's going to take to make the repairs? And then have we found the resources, the financial resources to do it?
We have turned, from an engineering standpoint, we have turned the corner. We turned it a few weeks ago when they were able to successfully implement the engineering project, which is actually quite impressive, to redirect the flow that was going into the Potomac, rather into the canal, to then go back into the Potomac Interceptor. From an environmental standpoint, the work is just starting. We know that the Potomac River testing levels are low enough to be able to reopen. We also know that the effect of the sewage on the canal itself is going to take time to remediate any long-term effects of the sewage on the canal itself. And the financial aspects, which in the immediacy are being borne by DC Water, and I believe largely will then be borne by Maryland, is still what we're getting. We're sort of still, that's the longest tail, is what it all cost, and how those costs are ultimately remedied is often the long tail. And obviously then doing an assessment of the entirety of the interceptor pipe to be able to objectively identify where there are other potential critical failure risks so that DC Water's capital funds can get appropriated to where we see the biggest risks to prevent something like this from happening somewhere else along those 50 miles of interceptor pipe.
And so thinking about how to prevent another situation like where we're having to worry about the interceptor and what have you, are we looking at the reports that DC Water did on the different pipes? I recall they said that the pipe that we have problems with was rated a C out of A, B, C, D, E. And so wondered if we're looking at all of those that were rated a C, and maybe even just looking at any that were rated a B to make sure we don't have rock pilage and what have. In other words, how proactively are we being now that we know that this can happen? Once it happens, it can happen again, as we know.
Well, I'm hesitant to speak about DC Water's plans because they are DC Water separate from DC government. What they have told me is that they have put a plan in place to do a independent evaluation of the structural competency of larger sections of the Potomac Interceptor to make sure that they are aware of any area that requires emergency or short-term repair, and doing it with technology that gives them full confidence in the results of that assessment. That's what I understand from DC Water.
All right. And so looking at the role of your office and the 3 divisions that operate within, is there any room or any thought that the lab might need to do some additional research on this?
That's a good question. If they were to do research, it would be in working in concert with DOEE. I would be hesitant to have them work on a DC Water because it's a scarce human capital resource. I want to apply that to district agencies, but they would be working with DOEE. But I would think DC Water would apply its own deep environmental expertise and engineering expertise to any remediation and assessment being done of the pipe.
Right. And I'm assuming that because your role is concerned with the entire DC enterprise, you would want to make sure that those kinds of reports would be coming forward so that the mayor would know exactly what's going on, because this is an issue that's before the public.
That's correct. So it is important for the mayor to understand everything that certainly DC Water knows. Even though the incident took place over 4 miles into Maryland, the Potomac flows through DC, and our residents are as concerned as anyone else about clean drinking water and the water that surrounds them in the Potomac and the Anacostia.
All right, yes, and I know that the drinking water is separate from the sewage line. Thank God for that. But yes, okay, thank you. How do you define crises in the context of city operations? For instance, another crisis, which I think we just went through, thank goodness, I think it's gone for this year, and that's the snow ice storm as an example. Is there anything that the lab needs to do with that and thinking about, obviously, the possibility of climate change that's happening? I grew up here. I can tell you, we never had a storm like that. But we have had sleet, but it's been a little thin, okay. And we've had snow like we had the other day, but not where you need a sledgehammer to break sheets of ice. That's just like at old Uli Arena, where you would go and get an ice, My dad used to tell me about that.
It's interesting. Over the years, perhaps what we all think of as a crisis has changed. When I think back at what was a crisis 12 years ago versus what's a crisis now. So a little bit of humor there. A crisis is something, an event that happens to us that consumes, it's atypical, that's unusual, and presents risk or real harms, or the risk thereof, and consumes the attention of the government, of the public, operationally, or from what's in the public's mind. And usually sometimes a crisis is contained within a single agency and a director has command of it, and a director in which the role of this office is to understand what the dimensions of it are, what the director is doing about it, and ask, is there anything you need? And sometimes the answer is nothing. And then the role is then making sure the mayor is aware of the crisis and the strategies to mitigate it and the dimensions of it. The second type of crisis is one that consumes multiple agencies. And this is where I find the role of HSEMA, our Homeland Security Emergency Management Office, is particularly important. And I think that's where that office's role has evolved over certainly 12 years, if not, going back 20 years. It had been an office that viewed through sort of like if you have a hurricane or a complex public safety event. I view it now as an office that's very good at collecting information from multiple agencies and having a short-term, you're almost reorganizing government on a short-term basis. And we call it the incident management team structure. And sometimes people have different jobs during that IMT process for maybe a month, or if it's COVID, maybe 2 years. If it's a single event, maybe a couple of days. And so we will, for multiple agencies, the role of this office is to make sure that cross-agency collaboration is happening. Where I feel like we have to go to do it in a particularly intensive way, I will ask HSEMA to get involved in more formally standing up almost an alternate org structure that has an incident commander who's a single individual who has a chain of command under her or him that might include people that do not work for them on their regular job. So you could imagine the fire chief as an incident commander, where HSEMA is putting the structure together, and you could have members of the health department or the Department of Buildings that are working in that structure as if that's where they work every day, responding to a chain of command. And that's a particularly intensive way. I think that's evolved, and that will be a permanent part of the fabric of DC government and other places. And the last thing I'll just say about crises and the role of this office is we have a way in this office of trying to get attention, direct attention from resources, both human capital, financial resources, to apply it in ways that wasn't envisioned at the beginning of the fiscal year. So a crisis might involve a reprogramming, a use of contingency cash funds. It may involve directing a director to reorganize or to focus on something new for a period of time, and making sure the mayor is at the nexus point of any important decision that has to happen regarding any aspect of it, in which the public would expect the mayor to be involved, informed in making decisions. And I think that is my references earlier on to playing defense. I think that is an often understated, undervalued, like essential part of what this office does, and how very often the people of DC remember their government. My last thing I'll say is you mentioned snow. We don't get large, messy snowstorms often. It's so infrequent that if you've been in DC a long time, you can just mention them and like the other, a resident will be like, oh yeah. For me, 1996 was my first large snowstorm. And if you've been, I just say, remember 1996? And I was like, yeah, I remember that. 2003, we had 2016. I think we had 2009. We had the one this year. So crises have a way of sticking in people's memories. And that's why responding well to things that we didn't ask for is absolutely essential part, I think an eternal part of what this office will always do.
Thank you very much for that. Of course, I could come up with bunches of additional what some neighborhoods or the city might consider crises. We can talk about the immigration situation and how certain parts of the city are really afraid to be out and around. But that's not fair because we know that those are crises that we have to deal with. And as you said, we have protocols in place for that. I'm thinking also about a crisis where we said we needed to hire more officers, police officers, but it's very hard to recruit them unless the city administrator can come up with, what is it, $50,000 bonus, hiring bonus, because that's what some of the federal agencies, which are flush with our cash, because we're a donor state, I always say that. But nevertheless, we don't, but that's an issue. It's something that we said was germane to us continuing, good government and having the resources. So I'm just, there are lots of things that we could talk about, but I appreciate you talking to us about the process that is used. And of course, we have currently the tax law that has the emergency law that expired yesterday. And so here we are. Where are we? That kind of stuff. So there are all kinds of things that we could bring to mind, but we're not going to talk about those. I want to know, as it relates to the ballroom construction at the White House, did we have any role to play in that, or is that sovereign federal territory where they can do anything, build anything, deconstruct anything, or are there permits that needed to be had? Is there a question about where the demolition was dumped or how it was transported out of the city? Just wondered.
I've tried my best to prepare for as many questions as possible. That is not one I don't have the answers readily at hand as to the extent to which the local government plays a role in that.
Okay, all right. Thank you. We were asked that question about why are they doing that to the White House? Why haven't you all said no? It's easy to say that. How are we doing as a government with updating our data and IT systems? Are our systems up to date, or will we need a huge capital infusion to modernize our system to keep up? And we always have this, everyone does in America, across the world, being hijacked, so to speak.
So we will definitely need to keep investing in our IT systems, both in the modernization of those systems as well as improvements to the systems. And then, of course, to mitigate cybersecurity issues, as you mentioned. I would say that, the district has been investing, we have been investing year after year in making sure that Octo is properly supported for cybersecurity because we are the nation's capital. And so we are at more risk than probably other places. So we've invested heavily in that area and will continue to do so. We are also starting to see a lot of our, what we would call legacy systems begin to be modernized. So I can think of in the current budget and in the future CIP budget, there's funding to upgrade our PASS system for procurements. We've talked about improvements for PeopleSoft. We are making improvements to our 2 core DMV systems for ticketing, and then all of the different processing. And I think, technology continues to evolve, and it continues to improve. Certainly, we are looking at investments that we can make in AI and how that can help us be more efficient and effective as a government. And Octo is spearheading that work to also make sure that we're very mindful about how we use it. And we are very intentional about how we use it so that we are safeguarding, people's information, but also at the same time, not potentially exposing ourselves to something that could go sideways. So we have to continue to keep making those investments year after year after year.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I want to talk a little bit about personnel matters and then move to workforce. Can you give us an overview of the current size of the district's workforce? And that is approximately how many are on the government's payroll? And does this number include independent agencies and authorities? Or is it just a number for those that are under the mayor's authority?
I believe when I last looked, it is about 38,359, give or take a few. That would include everyone under the mayor's authority, as well as independent agencies. That can fluctuate based on some seasonal hires. So if you ask me in summer, the number's higher. But that is the current count, I think, from PeopleSoft.
So is everyone in PeopleSoft? No.
I think most folks are in PeopleSoft. There may be some independent agencies that have their own systems in order to pay their folks, but they would still be counted under our total employee count.
All right. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. I just wanted, clarity. That was the nature of a question I asked some time ago. It was about the information that the Department of Human Resources has shared. And there are some agencies that do not use PeopleSoft. Okay. Regarding the district government employees not covered by union contracts, when was the last time they received a cost of living adjustment and their plans?
It has been at least 2 years since non-union employees have gotten cost of living adjustments. And that is one of the issues that is central to these last days of the budget, is looking how much money can be put into workforce investment.
Yeah, and it probably will be very tough this year, and as it was last year and for some time, unless we come up with some money makers.
It's in a tight budget. It's a very difficult, one of the last factors we look at it throughout the whole process, but when we come to final balancing, we try to understand how much money are we able to shift into workforce investment. Is there money in workforce investment that's not associated with the CBA that we need to be able to allocate to a critical service in government? And that will be one of the central questions as we finish out the budget.
All right. As it relates to labor relations, are there steps or processes that we can change or put in place that would speed up the whole negotiations process? I get that question from some of the unionized workers. And they also are curious as to this pecking order that we seem to have, where they're restricted or they feel they're restricted, that they cannot begin the labor negotiations or make the request until they're in the year that the contract ends?
I think, at least right now, the speed of labor negotiations is tied to the availability of funding. And when there was, when we were in our post-COVID year or two, when we had flush, everyone's economy was running hot, and we had flush federal aid, we negotiated, I think, 13 CBAs in about 12 months. It was record speed because it was the availability of funding. We had fair deals, fair for workers, fair for management. As those have begun to expire, as those have expired, we're in an economy that is struggling and where we have high costs of services. And so very often the availability of funding is pretty central to how fast or slow negotiations go. The two largest and most expensive CBAs, which are our teachers as well as our police officers, I think are two of maybe only 3 or 4 that actually are still active. The mayor put aside a significant amount of funding in the budget from about 2 years ago. I think on the order of maybe close to $500 million. Those 2 contracts alone, plus paying for the pension implications and the overtime implications, didn't exhaust it, but it ran it low to the point where now there's not the funding to resolve every outstanding CBA. So it's a matter of determining who can we get closure with and how much would we be, what will be the allocation to workforce investment in this upcoming budget, which is going to be very, very hard.
I would add also that, one of the consequences unintended of catching up with all of the unions post-COVID was all of these contracts got done at once. It is very expensive to be renewing all of these contracts at the same time. And so one of the tricky things that we've been trying to figure out with our labor relations folks and the unions is how can we space these out a little bit more so that it would be easier as contracts expire to be able to afford new ones. When everyone is trying to get in the same year or two with a new contract, it adds, I think, anywhere between $500 and $1 billion to our financial plan. And that is very difficult to find.
So I'm therefore assuming that in preparation for transitioning this government or this administration to a next administration, that would be one of the points that you would include in your transition recommendation book, because that is something we really have to consider and deal with. Same as with paid family leave. I note the last report, I think it was this week, from the chief financial officer. It indicates that we operating at a deficit, and so we've got to fix that. And we want to fix it without any increase in taxes. I'm not sure how we can do that, but I'm expecting the wizardry of your office to come up with some ideas.
That is definitely part of when I talked about the last 10% or the most important ones, that's definitely one of the decisions and analyses that we have that analysis, and you can either add additional revenue or adjust benefit levels to come back and win balance. And that's something that we'll assess sort of right up to the point where we really are pencils down.
And I suppose we'll have to think about how in neighborhoods where it's been kind of stagnant as far as new home ownership, the assessed values are lowered. So that could mean less assessed dollars that come into. So I guess you're working on that as well.
We are, and I,
Tough time.
it's a difficult time. I would also add that in addition to the sort of universal paid leave program, we also need to take a look at our own DC government paid family leave program. We did put forward some ideas last year for consideration of modifications we can make to really bring the program more in line with how the federal programs are run. And we will be doing that again this year. That is really, really important for us in order to help control our overtime costs. We have a lot of people out on leave, and for our mandatory staffing agencies, they are required to backfill, and it's costing us a lot of money.
All right, one sec. That's what we're going. Yeah. And that, what's the date? Yes. I was just checking on the date. We're doing a markup on legislation about that, so.
Wonderful, thank
Yeah.
you.
Trying to get, I think it's maybe the 26th, 27th of this month. 26th of March, yes.
That's
All
great.
right.
Thank
So
you.
we're trying to get there.
Thank you.
Thank you. Um, getting a little late, I know. In thinking about workforce development across the city and thinking about the biggest tranche of potential jobs that will come through the RFK campus project, is your office prepared to push really hard to make sure that we, I know the answer should be yes, and I'm sure you have that as the answer, but to make sure that we can ready our residents for these jobs. I'm very nervous because everyone across the region, outside the region, in different unions in particular, are speaking of this bonanza of jobs that will be available in the District of Columbia. And so it's going to take a lion's share, in my opinion, to get there. But I mean, how is that a priority? Is that priority number 2, number 3? You know,
It's a very high priority, and you predicted the answer. Like, yes, it's something that we're very much focused on. The principal interactions for the development is with the RFK office that reports directly to the mayor. Our role in the OCA is to make sure, like with other issues, that all the resources in government that can be applied to help that be successful are applied in a timely manner. For the case of jobs, there is a reasonable expectation that this is going to be a significant, meaningful source of employment for a lot of DC residents. So part of what we do is to make sure we hold accountable to the commitments that we all made, that the team made in the process of getting approval for the stadium, as well as that the identifying a source of talent, particularly skilled talent of DC residents that can be applied to those work sites, trying to make use of both our professional, our formal workforce development programs, as well as some of our universities, as well as some individuals who are not in our workforce development programs, but have skills that can be applied there. If I could just add like an addendum, while there will be a lot of thousands of jobs created by the RFK campus, as we go through the budget process, then one of the questions that the mayor challenges everyone with is, does any investment we are making or any new investment help create new jobs? That is sometimes a job that is the beneficiary of government spending or private spending, in this case, in collaboration with government. But very often it's a job that's in the private sector. And we know where our sources of employment are outside of federal government. It is in hospitality, it is in restaurants, it is in the service industries, it is in hotels, it is in more and more so technology, healthcare, and education. So we also, when you asked me about the rhythm of meetings with the mayor, the one weekly is the economic development deputy mayor. Part of every one of those meetings is talking about what we can do to be able to make the businesses that employ people just more successful. And as we pass the budget to you, the budget, I hope, will include both investments in the form of budget, but also policy proposals that can make us a more competitive landscape to be able to keep employers and attract employers.
I really appreciate that. And in thinking about the policy side of the equation, one of the biggest concerns is how do we convey to the businesses that benefit from the various grants that we drop into the community? Is there a way to expect them to, in turn, when they do additional hires, or if they're a new startup, to think and to do by hiring DC residents?
We are looking at, I guess, two ways to answer the question. One, we are looking at, as part of this budget process, every single program that is spending money on workforce development. And we're assessing them on three metrics. One is the cost per participant. So is it an efficient program? Is it a high-cost program? Two is, what is the placement rate in actual jobs? I say actual jobs being jobs that are not dependent upon government subsidy for the job itself, but is a job that someone can take for the long term. And third, the impact, how large is it? So we can have small programs with efficient, high impact we should invest more in. We can have larger programs that are maybe average outcomes, but are pretty cost effective. And when we have programs that are cost a lot per participant, have relatively low job placements rates, and we need to take that money and go somewhere else with it. And I think there's a credibility question that has started to come up in community meetings about what's the government doing to make sure we have programs that are about getting someone a job, that someone has a job at the end of it. So that's holding us accountable. On the business side, I think that the two areas that we look at are how do we reduce the cost of operating a business in DC? And my favorite of all is what are regulations that we can change that don't have a budget impact for us? I like those because then we can expand hiring in DC, expand businesses being able to hire folks without having to put it in a budget in a really tight year. So we're looking at both of those, and then if there's a budget nexus, that would be part of our budget package. If there's a regulation change without a clear budget nexus, we might put into the BSA. Maybe that's something we would announce or do when we roll the budget out, but it may not have enough of a nexus to the budget to put in the budget itself.
All right, I'm going to be looking to see what we can do with that. To me, it just makes sense that if you are garnering help from the government, that you also remember what the government represents and the people that, because these dollars ultimately come from the community. That's where they come from. And sometimes I think we forget that point, I'll just say. Or we don't press it as hard. And I know, Dr. Hewitt, that the community feels this way. I've heard it so many times. And whether it's a Black or brown community, as most people are usually concerned with, but all communities, all ages, you want to make sure that their tax dollar is giving or yielding something back tangible that they can see. And usually it's helping someone else, so.
If I could just, and I'll turn to Dr. Hewitt in a moment, one of the real values that I think ORE has had over a number of years is they're part of the budget process in helping advise and inform us as we're making choices around investments as to where we might see the largest impact, doing action plans that allow for that racial equity lens to be applied within an agency. And very importantly, like a very interesting, good dashboard of outcome indicators that aren't necessarily outcomes all about what the government does. Sometimes there's outcomes of life, whether it relates to housing access, employment access, or access to high-speed internet, and sort of seeing over the course of time how those have changed or not changed. And anything to expand upon that?
No, thank you for that, CA, and I would agree with that. And I think the city administrator really highlighted the analysis that should be taken in place when we have such a big project as RFK. Our team has thought a lot about RFK when it comes to racial equity. We know that it will have economic impacts, job impacts, but we also want to ensure that there aren't any unintended consequences and burdens felt by the community in proximity of the stadium. So I hear your question. I think that's something that we need to continue to think about, and how we can hold ourselves accountable, and how businesses can hold themselves accountable to the residents that are in their community.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And looking and thinking about housing, we're somewhat stalled with new development. We understand that. But in thinking about the housing needs, 5 years, 7 years from now, has there been any research through the lab that would inform us? I hear from older residents, because Stackles in my committee, I hear from them frequently wanting to have to downsize. But they want to be in a situation where they can afford to downsize. They want a balcony if they're in a building, because they want the air. They absolutely want that. So in thinking about beyond, I think the Fletcher Johnson location that's being tapped as a place where we might have some senior development or new senior development. What is the thought as you're coming up with new ideas or modifying existing plans as the landscape of the city changes? We're getting older as opposed to younger. So what can we do? And the cost of living doesn't seem to be going down in the next, at least I'll say 2.5 years.
It's a great set of questions. I'm going to give you my top line thoughts, and certainly for specific housing programs, I'll turn to Director Reed to be able to add into that. So housing, as you know, it's central to both this administration, any community meeting.
Yes.
It is now, you're right, it's morphed from housing to just the cost of being able to general affordability in this country, affordability in DC. For a long time, I don't mean that in the past tense, but for a long time and continued, the focal point has been on the production of housing as well as the affordability of that housing. So the Housing Production Trust Fund is not the only mechanism, but it's been a primary mechanism for which we've done that. The housing discussions, people often don't recognize the importance of supply and demand in just generally as a sort of a universal law of economics. So where you have more housing supply, it can stabilize and reduce costs or prevent costs from going up at quite the rate they are. Where you have a mismatch of demand for a location but very limited supply based on land use or density, it's going to always drive up the costs. And you add in the third factor is the cost of lending is just much higher. So you can have constrained demand with high costs of borrowing money, and that elevates housing costs more. Over the course of the many years that we've done the production of affordable housing, the cost per unit has increased, and the shift now has been towards the city has an investment of the public's money now in housing stock around the city. And we want to be sure that's stabilized, so financially they don't go under. It stays in good condition, so they have the funding to be able to maintain the building appropriately. And the units are being filled so that those units are generating income for the landlord to offset the need for additional government subsidy. So stabilizing the public's investment in our housing stock has been an important aspect of how we spent the last tranche of HPTF. Also really central to the legislation that was passed around the Rental Act of trying to just right-size our regulatory environment so that more units can come to active operation. The shift that I've seen is that the housing costs are, because rents have high, but they stabilize. Sometimes they come down a little bit. The cost of utilities, electricity, water, the cost of insurance. So the other costs that particularly for households like you're envisioning that may have had pretty stable housing costs for a long time because they're either in a fixed rental income, fixed rental cost a unit, or they're in a fixed mortgage, or they have outright ownership of their property. And so they've had what has been for a long time pretty predictable costs of water, utilities, insurance that have all skyrocketed. So part of the policy is not just on how do we invest smartly on the housing side, it's how can we make changes in law to be able to reduce the annual increases we've been seeing on particularly electricity, water, and insurance that are top of mind for a lot of folks in the city who, particularly those who have thought themselves to have pretty stable housing situations.
And I'll just add, you're very familiar with a lot of our housing programs. We do have the Safe at Home program, which allows for small updates to your home to allow you to age there. We also have the single family rehab program if you need something larger done and you're a low-income household, like a roof repair. You have helped create the senior shallow subsidy to help rental assistance for seniors. We've recently opened up, I think it was over 100 units of new senior housing at the Asbury and Berry Farm, another roughly 76 at Park Morton. So we are building. One thing I've heard the mayor talk about is we need to think about how we might be able to do something more with some of the larger homes that you have someone living in. So they had a big family at one point, the family's moved out. Are there ways that we could modify that home in such a way that they could have friends, right, come live and maybe open up some more housing that way? I think we still need to think a lot about that because, as you mentioned, the population is getting older and there's going to need to be more demand for this kind of housing.
And usually when we think about how to modify a larger residence, it means that the residences will be, that they'll be older and they will need home care aides. And so then that's back to workforce and how do we really push that? And then it takes us into our education piece. What are we doing about vocational education? The traditional, carpentry and things like that, certainly have their place, but there are other occupations that are sorely needed in our community.
I think that when I think of vocational trades programs, the Infrastructure Academy, which does connect
Right.
people with real jobs at the end of it, actually, the metrics I mentioned before, they have one of the highest rates of like that outcome measure.
Yes,
Did your person
yeah.
get a job? The Advanced Technical Center, which started as a somewhat small program that is meant to give high school students the opportunity to be able to get not just skills, but like a certification that they can use beyond high school. That has expanded, and I think if you think of that as not a niche program that we're trying to grow, which it is when it started, but a program that's a bit of a pilot. We have real data behind it that's very successful. So the question is, how do we make that accessible to every high school student that wants it? There's a structural question there about, well, to me, to do that, we need to have the partnerships and physical spaces to do the work. We also probably need to think about how it can be incorporated into the funding formula of a school. So it's not an add-on enhancement, but it's part of the fundamental baseline funding of how we fund high schools. So that is another, I think, example of what started as a small program with pretty rigorous assessments of impact that have borne out to be effective, that we're now expanding to multiple locations and looking at how we put it into the underlying baseline funding for schools.
Yeah, that's very exciting to know that this so-called pilot of a few years ago is now at a point of growth where it wants to expand. And I'm hoping that we can put it on the fast track because it really is needed. And in fact, it would be really very helpful, I believe, if we had a process where we looked at all of the kinds of occupations, some will be new, that are coming online, and begin the process now of identifying how we're going to convey that new occupation to our residents. And of course, we want to start with the schools because we have more contact there than probably in the private sector. But I really think that we need a very strong push around workforce. And it may seem like a small universe, but it has so many moving parts. It would dazzle the any system if we try to just pull it together with what we have now. Even in our government, we have a workforce program in about 12 different agencies. So they need to be brought together. We have different standards perhaps for deciding what is the course of training. Are all of them certified or certificate based? I mean, there's so much we can do with this. And I feel like we're a little behind, yet we are spending our money. And we're spending our money, I hope we're going to spend some of our money when we get some on how do we handle the downsizing of the federal government and the opportunities for land, and what would we do with it? I mean, that's here. Or is there something in the works that says another country will be able to come over and occupy that? I don't know. I'm just going far out to say, what is our plan? The FBI is moving next door. That means, I believe, that the larger plant down Pennsylvania Avenue will be there. You have HUD, a couple of other locations. What are we saying about that today, and if anything?
I think you've tapped into one of the most important long-term changes that we'll have in the district. We have really, since World War II, been a city of these monumentally large and often, not always, but often beautiful federal buildings that house thousands and thousands of people. Even when the federal government workforce stabilizes and increases, I don't think it'll ever go back to what it was before. The landscape of DC is going to change. It will not change quickly. You mentioned really important buildings such as the FBI building, which is a monumentally large brutalist building on sort of the most important boulevard in America. The HUD building, another example of brutalist architecture, but in Southwest Washington. The GSA building, I understand, both their regional area, but also their headquarters building. And I've read it, every month there'll be another announcement about the downsizing. It's work that the Deputy Mayor for Economic Development has talked to the mayor about, talked to me about. It is in terms of where in DC government should that live, I think some of the talent and experience in the Office of Planning is a very vital part, because I do think the timelines that we're discussing outlive any political cycles, because it'll probably, even with the best of plans, take many years to repurpose some of the buildings. Some of them likely have to get torn down or fully repurposed for other uses as the needs of our economy and our city change. There are opportunities to bring in residents to the city. The single greatest marker of our own revenue as a city is a resident who's employed in DC. So being able to have opportunities to generate more residential density in DC, particularly in downtown or federal corridor parts, is a vital part of that. And each one needs to be part of both comprehensive planning, but specific discussions with the federal government. DEMPED, Office of Planning, do have active conversations with GSA and the federal government around how we can make, where there are shorter term opportunities to make use of federal land. And they do engage with supporting some of the long-term planning that the federal government does, and that we do about how to make uses of, particularly I think of Southwest DC, where you have the largest concentration of these large structures that may not get occupied to the extent they were pre-COVID.
So when we talk about land use, I'm thinking too about the comprehensive plan. Are we poised to move forward with that? And if so, will the height limit be discussed?
So I know we are moving forward. The Office of Planning is getting ready to do I think it's the 2050 update to the comprehensive plan. I haven't been in discussions about the specifics with them, so I can't speak to whether or not the Height Act would be a part of that. I know that's something that's always discussed whenever we talk about changing sort of land and zoning policy across the city. I do think that we'll have to think about how we incorporate some of these federal properties in that process. Some may happen before we get a chance to really fold it into our evaluation. But I think, of course, no matter what, we would be looking at what is the highest and best use. And I think we'd certainly want to continue our push to create more residential units in the downtown core, where we don't have as many, and we saw the effects of, during COVID, what happens to neighborhoods that are really just commercial based.
Okay. Previously, I had a general discussion with the Office of Campaign Finance, and one of the things on their agenda has been having a board, which is, there's a board, it's law, but we haven't filled those positions. Where are we, given that campaign finance has more responsibility, particularly with the fair elections process, and then the contractors proposal, which really hasn't gotten off the ground, which maybe we need to pause the law until it can be implemented. So I'm just wondering if there's been given thought to moving ahead with appointments to that board.
It is not something I'm familiar with offhand, but certainly immediately after this hearing, I will raise it to the Mayor's Office of Talent and Appointments that does all the board appointments.
Thank you. Thank you very much on that. Oh, I forgot to ask you a little bit about DC Village, what's going on there and Poplar Point. DC Village, as you know, it's partially, that area of Ward 8 is partially used and not. Is there some thought as to ways in which we can use it to the benefit?
That is actually on I'm a fan of lists, and every week I make a list of what I want to try to get done or learn about each week. That actually is, prior to your question, on the list. Because it's a site that I've been to, the mayor has been to. We've had more than one director who has reached out to us with ideas for making use of that site. So it's something that I don't know if it would be in a budget, but it's something that I think we want to talk about as we roll the budget out, even if there's not a budget line around it.
All right. And then back to this discussion about our infrastructure, wondered if there has been thought given to bicycle infrastructure and safety. Do we have enough, and will your lab discover that we have enough cyclists that we need to have some sort of tag on the vehicle, because it's a moving vehicle? Frequently people complain that, oh, he knocked me down, but I don't know, it was a blue bike or something like that. And then we have those individuals who insist on riding without a helmet. So if we're going to have cyclists, what's the rule of engagement so that we're all safe and feel safe? And particularly cyclists that if hit by a vehicle, we know what happens.
It's a good question. One of the timeless questions that we focus on. So I'm going to there's a few threads of what you asked about. I think for the most part, the most effective way of addressing some of the challenges you highlight is the built environment. In other words, some bike lanes are more conducive to higher speeds than others. I bike around the city. Sometimes I bike to work. Not all bike lanes, even ones that are protected, are the same. And so it is important to look at whether a bike lane construction is going to generate a interstate highway of high speed. And how can the built environment sort of temper that speed and allow access for folks crossing through it. I'm thinking in particular, for example, of on 15th Street next to the Treasury Department, it is just downhill enough. As a biker, you don't have to use your brakes. So you go fast if you're going southbound, and you have pedestrians that have to cross over it as they're crossing the street. It's a protected bike lane, but it's an example of as a biker myself, even if you're a safe biker, you're going to hit a higher speed, and we kind of have to look at that as a factor when we design a bike lane. Second, bike lanes have sometimes been used as the primary tool around overall traffic safety, and there's other ways to be able to produce fewer crashes and injuries and deaths. Then we have to have multiple tools we apply to it because we do need to look at the volume of usage. Now, the heart of your question at the end was about, what do we do about folks who don't wear helmets? I think having registration or a plate of some kind for a typical biker is just, they're just not going to comply with it. And there's nothing that anyone can really do except maybe a few treatments. It's just, I don't think it would be effective. What I find is the most effective way to curb the behavior of reckless bikers is to have bike lanes that have a lot of bikers. Because if you're a fast biker, just you're naturally a little bit faster, and you're on a bike lane that actually has a lot of bikers, like no different than a car, if you're on a vehicle with a lot of traffic versus no traffic, you slow your speed down and you start behaving in ways that reflect the better behaving cyclists around you. If we build bike lanes that don't attract many bikers at all, it really is conducive to speed and taking chances, because just like if you're on a highway in the middle of, let's say, North Dakota, and you don't see anyone else around, people may go faster. If you're on a highway with traffic around you, you go slower and you start to respect speed limits. So I don't believe we need to do registration. It would be an enforcement challenge. I do think we need to make sure bike lanes actually attract bikers, and that can curb reckless behavior.
I hear you. That continues to be a discussion point. And maybe it's coming a lot from older people because they remember back in the day, we had to register our bike at the police station. So
Could I add one?
we were kids then, you know, young people.
One area where I think it also is coming up more often is electric bikes do provide like much higher speeds. I do not bike an electric bike. I have borrowed one occasionally, but you can have someone who is not, I've been biking in the city for 35 years. Like I'm a pretty good urban
Since
biker.
you were in diapers, yeah.
Since I was a little bit older, since I was in college here. And, but electric bikes has opened up a world in which individuals without a lot of experience or skills of urban biking, which you have to be aware of everything around you, can now go speeds of 25, 30 miles an hour, where with their own legs and like their own personal engine, maybe that tops they hit 15 miles an hour, which is not very. So I do think the presence and expansion of electric bikes have made the questions we're asking about registration more commonplace around the country. And I think that is sort of the particular niche where I think of electric bikes, where I think that discussion will play out more.
So what would be a logical follow-up, since there are a number of people who continue to bring this to our attention?
I think a discussion with DDOT, and I think it would probably limit it to not your general bicyclists and treating them all the same, but a conversation around electric bikes that don't have speed regulation in them. In other words, they go at higher speeds. Is that at some point do you get the power and speed in a bicycle with pedals that matches a moped, a small like engine moped or electric moped that is required to have a certain amount of like regulation around it? I would encourage you to avoid the broad discussion, because I do think it comes up more often in the context of electric bikes that go at higher speeds, and I find are often ridden by individuals who may not have a lot of experience maneuvering in the city on a bike. Sometimes I'm going to cast them all the same, but
All right.
sometimes.
And another safety concern is I think once I saw 3 on a scooter. Do we need something that speaks to the scooter is for one individual? But if I'm a mom and my 8-year-old wants to be on the scooter, or I can't leave the 8-year-old on the curb, what do I do? I mean, how are we, because those who visit DC love these moving vehicles. They do. I see them from my office window all the time, enjoying the District of Columbia. We don't want to crush that, but we do want people to be safe. We don't want to have liability.
I think I would start with education campaigns. A scooter, especially the stand-up scooters, are about the most fun way to see DC if you're a visitor here, because you can cover everything within a day. It's fun. And I wouldn't want to do anything that remove that way that really encourages and makes it a more positive experience being here. There are opportunities to educate people about the consequences and risks you take by acting recklessly. And certainly our rentable stand-up scooters are regulated for speed. Private scooters have much higher speed maximums on them in terms of how fast the engines can go.
All right, I just thought, I didn't want to leave that just sort of sticking out there. From your perspective, are there areas within the district's public safety portfolio that remain unsettled or require additional focus?
I think it's a good question. The agencies are in a really good spot in the sense when I think of, and I've been with the agency sometimes like very closely over 12 years, going back to my Capstat days over 20 years. And they're in a really good spot in terms of, it doesn't mean they're perfect, but they're stable, they're improving. They've been able to address some of the longstanding challenges. I'll give you an internal and external version. I think internally, police staffing, you highlighted some of the dollars and cents. Over the years, as much as people have written about why NPD's ranks grow and shrink, very often the stories avoid like the basics of economics, which to me is often why the police force grows and shrinks. It's very difficult. Arlington County, your first year salary is over $90,000 a year. You can have someone with, who's barely old enough to drink, pulling in $90,000 being a cop the first year. Our federal friends are offering $70,000, $75,000 bonuses, and starting pay equal to ours or a little bit better than ours. So there's like an economics that to me, we recruit more officers when we're competitively more alluring from a financial standpoint. We have a harder time with force strength when there's a lot of places folks can go. So we have to always be competitive. We have to particularly find ways of keeping people who are under 7 years. Beyond 7 years, you're far enough into your pension, you really don't want to leave. Under 7 years, you're low enough in your pension that you can shift. So that is an area of concern for me. And if it continues to be a challenge longer term, as a police force, we always have to get more and more efficient with our deployment of our resources. On the external side, I would say that the memory for me of how hard 2023 was from a public safety standpoint is still pretty fresh. So some of the gains that we've had over the past 2 years are not, to me, baked in the cake. They're not a given that we will sustain or continue that. We improved for reasons that we have control over collectively, both the whole ecosystem. We close more cases that are violent. We prosecute more violent individuals with good cases. We have been holding individuals, not in large number, but the right individuals. And that is, and nationally, there's been sort of the fragments of COVID and its effect on people's willingness to take high-risk behavior started to subside nationally, which has been helpful. Within the juvenile space, I think that is, for me, was the principal challenge of 2023, and I think is a rightful place of focus, is to make sure we are intervening early enough and effectively enough when people commit crimes or violent acts when they're still juveniles. That externally lingers for me as an appropriate area of focus, and staying vigilant and not taking for granted that not sliding back from an accountability standpoint, and just assuming that the gains we've made are a given. Everything can be reversed. There are delicate gains and ones we have to protect and be pretty disciplined around.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I take from all of what you've shared with us today that government is a living process, that priorities exist, crises occur, but ultimately, the government comes and goes. We set as a major priority, we pass laws, and things get better, improve, and then we forget about it until there is a crisis. And I think you're sharing with us that's the nature of government. And when it's a crisis, government jumps on it and, looks for a solution, makes a solution. And that's the way we operate. That nothing is absolutely in concrete. It may touch on concrete, but it's not absolutely in concrete because it can change. And it changes with time, it changes with the players, and it certainly changes with as it tries to meet community needs. That's what I'm hearing from today. Not saying it's a bad thing, but just really wanted to think a little more about where we were. I can talk a little bit about seniors, but I think we have beaten the horse nearly to death. And I want to ask you about the archives to make sure that we are, is it in its final location at UDC now? And we can move ahead to the best of our ability with a budget that is
I'm always
years out.
I'm always hesitant to talk about the budget before the budget's done. That's not my indirect way of saying we're going to sweep the archives. It just means that we haven't yet balanced our capital budget. As long as the archives is in the budget that the council passes and approves, we will respect and implement according to what the law says. So that includes location, that includes sort of the composition, as long as the costs all stay within budget. The archives, if I dial it back a year ago now, or even before that, is an example of, and I'm using this as a representational example, not just as the archives. But when projects, when we try to solve a lot of needs with one project, the projects can get so overweight financially that they're really hard to move forward with. So the archives, we want a better place to be able to have our irreplaceable documents, have it be accessible from an academic and research standpoint. But sometimes then maybe we want other programs there. And we want a particular piece of land that is ideal but is difficult architecturally from an engineering standpoint. We want it to be net zero or close to it. We want to make sure that all the appropriate, that we have union labor working on it. So it is the lesson of the, so if the archives in the approved budget in the years, we will execute on that as expected of us as public servants. The broader lesson I'd like to share with you, but also colleagues, is just being mindful of not trying to solve 5 problems when we're trying to really solve one problem. Then projects can get difficult to move forward with and much, much more expensive.
All right, and I then must ask about another one or two that are trying to get on our capital budget, and that's the Wellness Center for Ward 3.
So I know that DACL did a feasibility study to look at potential locations for a senior wellness center in both wards 2 and wards 3.
Yeah.
I believe that feasibility study is going through our internal review process and should be released shortly. I believe that there's funding placed in the capital budget for a facility in one of those wards when it was passed last year. I can't remember which ward it was slated for.
Well, yes, 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 one of the wards, but not the one that's been waiting forever.
Got it. But it is definitely something that we are aware of, and we're talking about this as we finalize the budget.
All right. I had to ask that question. Recently, I had the occasion to talk with DGS about the amount or the dollar amount of all of our leased properties. And just wondered if are we considering downsizing at some point? Okay.
Yes, it actually was a subject of, going back to an earlier question, a city administrator's order to freeze our leased space, as well as to, second, prioritize rent reductions over tenant improvements. Not that we won't do any tenant improvements, but we want to be able to control our costs, and that becomes a principal objective of the negotiations that we have. And we want to make sure that we have an efficient use of space. That is the area that we can make the most improvement in, and we have the most opportunity for improvement. And that involves two things. One is that we have leased or built out office space. And typically, if it was built out, envisioned during COVID or right afterwards, there was a emphasis on open spaces that people would gather in but not work full-time in. And that, I think, was well-intentioned, but we probably have too many open spaces where we don't have people working in them full-time. So we want to make more dense use of the spaces we have. And two, when we have a cubicle or an office, it ought to be used 5 days a week. And if there are any offices that are either don't have the staffing they once envisioned, so they have a lot of empty spaces, or they do, but they have telework policies that may not have everyone in the building, we want DGS to enforce at least 4 day a week, but at least a 5 day a week ratio to make sure workspaces are always occupied, even if not by the same person. You can have hotel and you can have two people who alternate days if they work 2 or 3 days a week. And that's the area where we clearly have a lot of opportunity to improve and make better use of our public dollars.
Yes, thank you for that. In fact, I think the badge swipe results are showing like 3.2 or 3 point, I think the highest I saw was 3.8. So they're very close to 4 days. And so that probably makes sense. But I just wanted to raise that because, everything that we spend resources on is before us, as Jenny would say. I took the words from her mouth. And so want to make sure that the public understands that we're trying to deal with economy of scale, but it is difficult because we have systems that have been in place for a very long time. And again, as the city administrator said to me here today, nothing is happening overnight in the way of change. And as I tried to say, the government is a living process. And so that's all of us, all 37,000 of us here at TAKE. So I wanted to mention that. I won't go into health insurance because I know that's something that we're really struggling with because we don't want to leave anyone out. Years ago, we would, on an annual basis, have these campaigns where we would toot, oh, 92% everyone in the city is on a plan. 96% everyone's on a plan. And so I know how important health insurance is, and I know we're struggling to give everyone an opportunity to be a part of that. So I appreciate that. And this is, like I said earlier, this is my last opportunity to talk oversight. But one of the areas I've always been concerned with is our public school budget. And I'm concerned with it from the standpoint of the many different ways we account, how we spend the budget. And just wondered if, as you mentioned earlier, if we're going to have more opportunities for students to be in trades, how would we calculate that? We already calculate resources for at-risk students. We calculate resources for special needs. We also have the other category of where we, the transportation system. And the transportation system has, is now 4 or 5 parts. It's no longer just the bus and the drivers. It's diverse so that parents can get monthly resources, financial resource. So I say all of that to say that our school system and working on behalf of our young people is so huge. Every year we grow. So what's going on? I mean, how are we going to speak to each dollar and how each dollar is spent to educate our young folk and to grow them an opportunity to be a part of society?
I will start, and I'll turn it to Director Reed to sort of go into some detail about the education budget. As you do, your question has a number of threads to it that all under one topic. I think the ATC is we have to make programs like that part of the funding formula. It's challenging when it's smaller because a school, it doesn't free up a resource at a school unless you have a lot of scale, but we have to start making that part of the funding formula so it's not vulnerable because it's seen as an add-on program. The cost of DCPS is essentially a function of labor costs. So the personnel costs go up each year, often at least now above our revenue growth. And I think that is something we will have to grapple with. The education size is growing, but birth rates nationally are declining. So I think over the next 5 to 7 years, we may be looking at a question of, as our school-age population nationally starts to shrink, and therefore as DC's plateaus and shrinks, how do we start to adjust what we do for the cost burden that we have? In other words, we have schools, elementary through high schools, many of them are not very large. They're small schools that are able to give really customized supports. Not very efficient. And then if you have a flat population or a population where enrollment's starting to pull back for the charter sector for DCPS, how do we start to make adjustments that allow for us to maintain quality? And I think I always start when I think of problems or challenges, there's always an assumption, and not always, often an assumption that people look at it within the parameters of a government program. I like to start with, well, what's happening in the environment around us and what roles does the government program play? So around us, the structure we have is a flat birth rates and declining birth rates, maybe a flat public school population that may be flat, maybe doing better than the surrounding jurisdictions, but still is flat or growing at only marginal rate. And then we have a cost structure in which it grows at 4 or 5% a year for any given employee when our revenues grow by 2 or 3% a year. And so everyone should look at the questions of education in the context of these currents that are around us. So for us in the budget that we put forward, the mayor prioritized education investments in a difficult budget year. And then within that, it doesn't mean there won't be any pain felt by any school, but we prioritize through a matrix that the chancellor puts out, making sure we preserve and keep the adult slots where we have adults that are interfacing directly with kids and educating them. So we're trying to prioritize that. If I stretch the trend out 5 or 7 years, I think the questions that the council and the executive at that time will be asking is, what's the right size for school? The charter sector, for example, is a sector that has grown to be about the size of DCPS. Are there controls that ought to be placed on the development of new schools because it comes at the cost of making other schools financially difficult to be able to manage? And in a world in which our revenues were growing at 4, 5, 6%, you didn't have to make these trade-offs, but you do when you have to. And my last thing I'll just say is that you mentioned the OSSI DOT. That is an example where, for me, there was enormous amount of innovation. I know they're still trying to get the GPS down, but there are, as you said, multiple ways that kids who have IEPs can get to schools, whereas just 2 years ago, there was just one way. So you can have a parent stipend, you can have a private provider, often in a sedan. So you're not using a big bus. You have buses, just like we always have. So and then we've done a much better job really removing from the roles for transport instances where the parents say, we don't need a ride. And so we're able to reduce the number of kids we're transporting without the kind of blowback that would generally cause massive hearings, reduce the average cost of transporting a kid because we had to think much differently. And that came out of fiscal crisis. Like, we couldn't afford to do what we were doing. And I think the other sectors of our budget and our local government, like the fiscal challenge, will produce innovation. It's going to have to, because we cannot do what we've always done. In the healthcare space, we managed to stand up between HBX and primarily led by HBX, the basic health plan. So we were able to provide healthcare that was almost the same, not identical, but almost the same as what Medicaid was providing. And without that mechanism, we would have had to really remove people from healthcare. And that was innovation born out of scarcity. And it's iterative. We'll see it in more and more parts of our budget. And that's why in my testimony, I said we have to think about how we do things differently, because we can't keep doing things how we've always done them. But there are details about the DCPS budget I'll ask my budget director to kind of go into.
Sure. So as you know, council member, the DCPS budget is complicated. It's kind of broken out into 3 different sections. We have the central office, then we have the school support budget, we have the school-wide budget, and then we have the individual school budgets themselves. So when we produce the budget, DCPS does provide quite a bit of detailed information about the individual school budgets. I think they've improved that level of information and its clarity over the years. I think what's important is most recently, DCPS has been providing guidance to schools as we go into more resource-limited environments, how they should think about prioritizing their resources. We have a lot of adults in schools who are not teachers. Doesn't mean they aren't performing critical roles, but we have a very large number of adults that are providing different services in the schools. And as you get to more limited resource environments, it's really important that you prioritize those really front-facing positions that are most directly impacting the students' learning on a day-to-day basis. And unfortunately, some of those support positions, while helpful, just aren't the highest and best use when you have limited dollars.
So when we talk about the non-classroom instructor, what is the number of, I'll say, helpers, the other human resources that are in the schools that are public facing indirectly, but help the instructional part of our school system?
So I don't have the numbers right in front of me on this particular issue, but what I would say is, there's kind of like, I guess, four big buckets is how I would think about it. So there's the health providers. So that's both behavioral and physical health providers that are in the school. There are the aides, right, that do often work directly in the classroom with the teachers, providing support. And then there's a variety of other positions that are sometimes administrative positions, sometimes very highly specialized to the school to meet their specific needs. Typically, when we submit the budget to the council, we do produce a chart that shows the number of basically staff that come via other agencies into the schools through DC Health, through Department of Behavioral Health, support through OSSI-DOT. So we can provide that again, and how that sort of breaks out from your like general education classroom teacher.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I wanted the public to at least have an opportunity to digest it, because we were talking about, oh, we may have to have a layer which deals with trades, which is really where a lot of the energy in our country is now, getting young people to understand that you can leave high school and go right into the work environment, and so, and that's what many want to do. I remember last year talking to a group of young people who were, 10th, 11th, 12th graders, and it was very interesting. What they wanted to know is, could they have like a work study curriculum, one where they would earn, at least 2 days a week, they were earning some resources. And they were willing to do the extra hours if needed, so that they could complete the curriculum, academic curriculum, and at the same time um, earn resources money. And they talked about family needs. It was really kind of amazing to understand that the student of today is not that student of 20, 30, 40 years ago. So I know you're discovering that in your conversations, I'm sure, because young people are pretty animate about what they see and what they need. I had a 8th grader tell me, "Oh no, I don't need to be in school. I need to make money. Do you understand? I need to make money." I said, "You need to be in school too," but the point was well taken. You know. Okay. I thought you were ready to.
I was then, but you said okay, so I thought maybe I should hold off. Now, I just, one of the aspects I just wanted to highlight that what you said there just prompted with me was, we recently changed the high school curriculum requirement to try to allow for space for that. It's actually very difficult for a student to be able to have opportunities for professional credentialing and development and still fit in all the credits they need to graduate high school. So when we think of problems, it's important to sort of understand, why does something exist that it does, and what has to change in the rules around it. And that's actually a case where we have changed some of the rules to allow for more flexibility. So high schools now can allow much more easily their students to be able to have out-of-school experience, get credits for it, that allow for them to be able to go into the workforce shortly after. And beyond that, maybe you had one elective that someone could, in their senior year, make use of, that would represent maybe an hour every couple of days in a school week. But there's more flexibility that sort of, I think, will open up opportunities that can really scale out what you're talking about.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Um, Okay, I've been given the go-ahead to thank you profusely for spending time with us, and I'm sorry it is a little bit after 5:30. We had planned to be here until 8 p.m., but we understand. No, I'm just
Knowing where you set the end time, I do appreciate the chance to be here and your willingness to end before 8
Yeah.
p.m.
No, we appreciate hearing from you, and it's all very, very, very general, and just wanted to give the public a little taste of what this office really is engaged in.
And if I could ask, am I the final oversight hearing of your
Yes,
oversight
yes, you
hearing
are,
schedule?
definitely.
In the final year of oversight hearings? I know you'll have many more hearings, but I do want to thank you for
It's
having
very kind.
intellectually stimulating and interesting and sometimes unpredictable, in a good way,
That's the point.
conversations. I know you told me before, yesterday when I was looking to know some of the questions on the quiz of that was this hearing, you said, don't worry, you can't prepare for what I'm going to be asking you about. So I always have fun. I always appreciate your thoughtfulness and the chance to be here with you.
That's very kind of you. Thank you all so much. I appreciate your work, and I know it's much more difficult than anything that we could see or imagine, because I just take my little office of 10 of us. It's a lot. And I'm sure my colleagues feel that way with their committees and what have you. And just think of all of the different services that we provide and the processes that we must do and be a part of, and then the regulations that we must follow. It's an awful lot. And so I'm very proud of my government, obviously. And I think, thank you very much for the time you've spent with us. And we'll be talking budget, I guess, soon.
In a few short weeks.
Okay. So with that, I want to thank everyone who participated in today's performance oversight hearing for their many contributions. From our performance oversight season, it was made clear that the committee touches a broad spectrum of interconnected issues that impact our community at every level. If the public has any additional thoughts or would like to submit written testimony regarding the performance of these agencies, please upload it to the hearing management system at dccouncil.gov, or you may email it to seal@dccouncil.gov, and that's CEAL at dccouncil.gov. The hearing record will close March 19th at 5 p.m. And with that, this hearing is concluded. And the next meeting of the committee will be a public roundtable on Thursday, the 19th of March. And we will be focusing on the newly introduced Commission on Poverty Policy Recommendations Report and Members' Appointments. And that concludes our hearing for today. Time is now, what is it, 38 minutes after 5 p.m. Same day we started on March 5th, 2026, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you. Thank you. Latola.